Hi everyone, this is Ollie at Magic Hands Hobbies. We're going to look at painting this Dwarf referee from the Blood Bowl Season 2 box set. We're going to start with this Army Painter Oak Brown. This will form the base tone of the skin. I don't tend to have recipes for skin. I'd like to wing it and make it all natural. There's variations between everybody's skin, and I see that as being the same way with models. They're not all going to be exactly the same. Some people do paint them the same, that's absolutely fine. I'm not going to criticise that. This is just the way I like to do it. This particular paint is very thin. I have shaken it up to the best of my abilities. I've got agitators in the bottles, so as you can see, I've had to go back and apply a second thin coat, so as not to obscure any detail. I'm going to give you a bit of a disclaimer. The video is one of my first. A lot of the shots are very low in the screen, as you can see. Some are even off the screen. Some are very, very badly in focus, and I can only apologise for this. I am learning. This is filmed off my phone. I don't have a dedicated camera as yet. If this ends up becoming a regular thing, I may well invest in something like that. That will all depend on feedback that I get from you, whether I enjoy doing this, and whether or not I have the time in order to invest. I'd love to do this. I'd love to do this as a career. I'd love to do it, as my main source of income. But the market is becoming saturated with people like me doing this. This is mainly for fun, but I've had people requesting videos, people requesting tutorials. So this is me trying to give back to the people asking. So I've used Army Painter Tan Flesh to build up the next layer of skin tones, working with highlights being on the top of the model, working down, trying to use volumetrics, and gradually increasing the colour on top of the model. I haven't added anything to the tone of this. It is still the same skin colour, but as I'm building up the layers, you can see it is effectively getting brighter, focusing on areas where light would catch, with the areas getting smaller and smaller and smaller. It may well be actually that I have added something to this, but I've missed it off the recording potentially. It does actually look a little bit brighter than the original skin tone. I don't think I'd have added white. I think I would have added something like the elf skin tone, which is slightly paler from Army Painter. So apologies if that is the case, but the principle still is the same. You apply lighter tones as you're gradually building up. I've done this in doing the skin first. A lot of people would base coat the entire model with the colours that they want to go for. It really depends on how you want to work. Nothing's right, nothing's wrong. Even if you do techniques in a slightly different way, I've seen painters on YouTube who have said that they're dry brushing, and they're clearly not dry brushing. It's more of a wet brush. In the sense that they are following the same tutorial, the same method as a dry brush, but they are actually applying quite a lot of paint. They're not wiping the majority of it off. It doesn't matter, as long as you achieve the finish that you want, then it doesn't really matter what you do. So now we're going to get some Parasite Brown from Game Colour, from Vallejo, and we're going to apply that to his beard. Now this is a first. I've never used this colour as a base coat for a dwarf's ginger beard. It actually turned out pretty good. I didn't want a pure brown. I wanted there to be an orange tone to it. So this seemed like a logical solution. So I'm just finding all the little bits of the beard above and below and just making sure that I'm covering. It does need an additional coat, which is what I'm doing here. Because it is quite thin. There it is, all finished and dried, not very well in focus, so apologies for that. We're going to get some mummy robes, and we're going to apply this to the clothes of the ref. The reason why I've selected this is I don't want pure white, as much as it probably is pure white in reality. We don't want that on here. I've had to apply again 2 thin coats to this to make it stand out, and eventually we will put some black stripes onto it. But I think it's covered pretty well. It's got a nice matte finish to it as well. Right, so now we need to move on, and we're going to move on to the Charred Brown, which is going to paint all the dark leather. I tend to use different colours for different types of leather. So anything, in this particular case, the book, his boots, any shoulder pads, etc., will be done with this charred brown leather. We're going to use the Stonewall Grey to fill out pages in the book. Again, this is because it's not white. I don't want pure white. I don't think they'd have had the facility to make pure white pages, so we're going with an off-white, and then that's going to get stained with a wash later on anyway. So we're just going to carefully go in to the pages. Now you could argue that maybe I should have done the pages first and then gone over with the brown, but the problem is if you're not careful with the brown, then it goes onto the white, and vice versa. If you're not careful with the white, it goes onto the brown. So one way or the other, you need to try and find whatever's best for you. I'm not telling you how you should do it. We're turning to the charred brown. We're going on to his boots. I'm not doing the front of his boots because they have like these metal toe caps over the front, which is I would imagine a typical dwarven element. Beastie brown. This is the brown I'm going to use for leather straps. I've been using this on the majority of my Blood Bowl models. It just provides a nice variation in leather tones. I could do the whole thing, all leather, all one colour. Trouble is, it doesn't always look good. You need to provide tonal contrast. It may not have come from the same animal, for example. So just going all around the straps, all the ones on his shoulders that are a continuation of the ones that are holding the book on his back. Now we're going to get some Scarlet Red from Vallejo Game Colour. This is colour in the books. He's got 3 books. Again, because I've used a black base tone, and I want to get the pure colour of that red coming through, I will need to do several coats. You can see I've done a couple of coats there, just trying to work around the edges of the books with being very careful not to get it onto the clothes. Turns out alright. We'll leave that to dry and we'll come back to it and apply some shades and highlights later. Now we're going to move on to Imperial Blue, again Vallejo Game Colour. We're going to apply that to the other books. There's 3 books in total. There's the one under his left side, one under his right side, and there's actually one just tucked under his beard. I made the decision to paint his trousers blue as well. Not sure why. It's one of those things that just jumped out at me. Now, one thing I should say is don't be afraid to make decisions like that. I've off the fly just thought, you know what, I think that might look good, and I just paint it. You're never going to know unless you try. It might turn out to be a disaster, in which case, fine, let it dry, paint over the top of it. Not that big a deal. Scurvy Green. Now this is for the book. I apologise, it's off frame very slightly, but this is Scurvy Green that I'm applying to the book underneath. So you've got the whole RGB thing going on there. Not very easy to get to either. This is because I've stuck the model down to the base. I don't typically do this, but I was too excited when I got the box that I just didn't even think. And I just stuck them all down. Usually I'd stick it with one foot on and the other foot off the base. That way you can hold it in the, in this case the Citadel paint handle, and you'll be able to get under the model and access everywhere on the model. I have seen people use paper clips, I have seen people use wire armatures and things like that. That's absolutely fine, I'm not criticising that, it's just not the way I like to do it. Right, Citadel Agrax Earthshade. I love this, and the Nuln Oil. Got to be really careful. You really need to make sure you shake that bottle though, because if you put this on and you haven't shaken it, and especially if you put it on too thick, it will go glossy, and it is not very nice. I do a model later on, the Troll, and he's got a goblin that he's throwing, and that goblin has come up so shiny where I've either put it on too thick or I have not shaken the bottle. One thing with washes, be careful, don't let it pool. You don't have a huge amount of time with these paints. The reason being is they stain the colours underneath. So if you let it dry and then you have to go back to it and retouch it, you're going to scrape the paint and you're going to be left with a tide mark. The other bad thing is if it does pool, there's not a lot you can do. It is savable. You just go back over with the original base colour, but slightly watered down, so you're kind of feathering it in. I don't have an example of that on here. Actually, it turned out pretty okay. So just also gone over the pages, just staining the pages so that they're not that off-white colour. They're more coffee coloured. I'm switching to the Nuln Oil. That was a really pathetic shake. I have already shaken it up, but it's just a habit. I just tend to give it a quick, shake before I do anything with it. I'm going to put that all over all of the leather, his boots, the leather parts, and even the we haven't done the metal yet, but I will be using it over the metal. I love the sheen that it produces. It's a really handy wash to have. Okay, so it's a bit wet, obviously, but we're now just making sure that we've covered all the places. You've got to be really, really careful not to scrape anything that is partly dry. Like I said, you don't want unsightly tide marks. Now, luckily, I haven't even put any highlights on yet, so highlights will go over the top of this, and you know, it would disguise any scrapes or tide marks. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. It's turned out okay. We need to do his beard as well at some point, and I'll be using Agrax Earthshade. If I use the Nuln Oil, I think that would put a tone on there that wouldn't be to my liking. It needs to be a brown colour to stick with the natural tones of ginger hair. So you can see it's pulled into some of the recesses there. Now that can work in your favour in some ways. I'm pretty sure I go back and I get rid of that. Quickest way to do that is to use a brush that hasn't got much of the wash on it. You can see there, because I've already brushed some of the wash off. You can go back in and it almost sucks it up like a sponge. Capillary action, it draws it back up into the brush, and you can save it pretty quick. On the other hand, some people, I would imagine, would like to leave that there. It helps reinforce the shadow areas. So you can see I have actually left some deep in those deep recesses. Now this won't be it finished in terms of the hair. You can see it does actually produce natural highlights and shadows, but I will actually go back and put additional highlights on. Right, so now moving on to Leather Brown from Ari Painter. We're going to use this to add some highlights and some texture to the book. Now obviously the sculpt itself has already got texture on the edge of the book, but that is only to the edges. What we're trying to do now is trying to provide a bit of variety. It's almost a stippling motion that I'm applying onto this, just to show almost wear and tear to the edge, as well as providing some nice contrast into the shadow area underneath the leather strap. Just gradually working it around. There's no right or wrong method for this. Just go with what you feel works for you. Just gradually working all the way around, just to give a worn look to it. This is a good view of what I'm trying to achieve here. Don't forget, try and look for all the little nooks and crannies. It's a bit of a pain when you've painted the model almost finished and then you realise that there's this little bit hiding underneath something that you've missed. Then you have to go back. This is especially a bit of a pain if you are using, if you were not using a wet palette, because if you've mixed colours and they're dry, you can't go back to it. At least with a wet palette it will keep for a couple of days. I do find that it does tend to water the paints down though, especially if you've got too much water in your wet palette. It tends to water the paints, so as much as it keeps it alive for a few days, you tend to lose the viscosity of it. So I've now gone in with additional skin tones just to try and rejuvenate the skin of the dwarf. It was looking a bit wishy-washy for my taste, so I added some more of the tanned skin tone over the top. And what we're doing now is just building up some mid-tones and highlights onto the blue book. I apologise of it being out of focus. I do get better at this. Applying some highlights. Now this is using actually the base colour of the leather straps. I think it was the Beastie Brown. Just going around applying some edge highlights to the book. In order to do edge highlights, you don't use the tip of the brush, you use the side of the brush. You just gradually just drag it along the edges that you want. Obviously there are going to be areas where you have to use the tip of the brush because you just can't get the brush side in there without ruining another part of the model. So just having a look at the model, that's one thing that I recommend, is whenever you get to any kind of stage in the painting of a model, sit back, take a few minutes, have a look at it and review it. So we're now going in with the original base tone of the material, and we're just going to go over and work a smaller area, leaving the shadows. I'm starting to build up the main mid-tones. I don't put any highlights on the white of this, not because I forgot, it's mainly because I was happy with the way that the white looks at the end of it. It's trying to imitate real life material. I'm not trying to make it smooth. You can see I've left texture in there. I've not applied anything like scratches or anything like that, micro scratches, especially by the fact that I'm going to be putting some black stripes on there, which is the first time I've ever done it. Edge highlighting for the book, the blue book. We do go and do this on the red as well, and to a degree the green, but the green one is so hidden that you're not really going to see it. Lava orange, really trying to bring out the intensity of his ginger beard now. Again, just working over the raised areas and focusing on the bits that would mainly be getting light. It's looking pretty good. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Okay, so next we're going to continue with the beard. We're going to do lava orange and filthy brown, and this is going to just pick up the topmost parts of the beard. Now in actual fact, the bits that I've just painted there underneath his arm probably wouldn't actually get that much of a highlight. It would be the bits to the side of his hand that's holding the whistle, and then over above his face. Again, apologies, really bad focusing. There is actually an option on my phone where you touch the part on the screen and it will track and focus the model, and occasionally you'll see the camera shake where I've reached up and touched it, but I'm so focused on painting the model rather than looking at the screen that, you know, it's not very easy all the time to get this done. I do figure out in the end that I need to have a background behind that it can focus on, which is close to the model, which actually helps a lot, and on later videos I have done that. I'm going to paint a matte black. Love this. It is so matte. It's really nice paint to work with, and it covers really well. Occasionally when I've undercoated a model in Chaos Black, the Citadel primer, I will go over the whole model with a slightly watered down coat of this paint. It really does make the model and the detail stand out, rather than having a gloss or a shine to it. I'm guessing I didn't do that with this one, because you may have noticed at the beginning of the model, at the beginning of the video, it was very shiny. I've gone in with a much thinner brush this time, really trying to focus, trying to get those lines. I'm not too bothered about the creases. I don't want it to look unrealistic, but at the same time I'm not too bothered where the lines follow down. At the end of the day, this isn't a primary model. It's not going to be one playing the game. He's a ref at the end of the day. So yeah, quite happy with those stripes. I'm not going to highlight the stripes. It is literally just going to be the black. If I really wanted to do it properly, there would be some kind of highlights on there in like a very, very dark grey. May well do that in the future, but at the moment I'm not that bothered. Right, video game colour, bloody red. Adding the mid-tones and highlights to the red book. Covering the majority of the model except where the arm passes over. Now what I find very odd with miniature painting is that we draw in the shadows. The model naturally creates its own shadows, but if you don't draw those shadows in, paint the shadows in, it looks odd, which I've always found a bit of a weird thought. You know, you don't find highlights painted onto real life objects, and yet we forcefully paint it onto a model in order to make it look right. Whereas if we just put it under a light outside, you would, or even inside, you get the highlights automatically. Right, we're moving on to silver parts, or metallic parts, sorry. And I love this paint. It's so good. It covers really well. Just doing the boots, the padlock, and his whistle. This whistle's not very easy to get to. Excuse the state of the brush. That one really needs a good clean. Always good to keep your materials and your tools clean, because at the end of the day they're the workhorse. They're the ones that are actually putting the paint on the model. if it ain't a good brush, if it isn't looked after, you're not going to get the results that you want. How I paint a greedy gold. Now I do have a recipe for gold that I tend to use, and it is simply you put on a base coat of gold, you put on a wash of the Agrax Earthshade, highlight with the original gold, and then you put a much brighter gold as a final highlight on top. Now I may have misinterpreted the way this model's supposed to be. Again, I suppose there's no right or wrong. I'm coating all of this as gold. I have a feeling that that hasp that's got the padlock going through actually should have been metal, really. In reality, you wouldn't have it made out of gold because it's not strong enough. Painted the hinge and the rest of that strap, which I believe actually is supposed to be leather where I've put the wash now. But I'm going over with the Agrax Earthshade. There's no right or wrong for this in terms of what's what. Just do what you think artistically looks good. One thing I think I wish I had done though is instead of having a brown book on its back, I wish I'd had a coloured one. But overall I think I'm happy with the result. Don't forget that whistle. It's not going to be absolutely perfectly shiny, I wouldn't think. Although he is handling it a lot, so maybe it would. But I put a bit of wash on there anyway, just to try and make sure it doesn't stand out too much on his face. Overall, looking quite good. I got a hairdryer on hand that I will quickly whip out and dry during this process, make things a lot easier. You've got to be really careful if you do it on a wash though. You don't want it blowing the wash into places that you don't want it. Okay, we're going back in with the silver. We're just adding a few highlights to the metal. This is the same colour that I used to base coat it. Unless it is an element that stands out on the model, I don't like to, make too much of an effort. I mean, these are his boots at the end of the day. They're going to get muddy and they don't need to be all shiny, etc. Go in and do the buckle and any little fasteners that I can see. Being really careful not to get it on the rest of the model. Don't want to slip up on this. I have painted the feather, the quill in the ink pot. Did that with the same base coat as his clothes, put a wash over the top of it, and then I'll go back and and I'll go back and highlight it using the original colour. I'm not making that much of a fuss. When you look at the Imperial Nobility team that I've done, which I don't think I've got a video on, although my first test video for the YouTube channel did have one of the nobility in there. You can see that I put a lot more effort in with the feathers on their heads, and I had good fun doing it as well. Just going back in with the Beastie Brown, the original base colour for the leather on the straps, just trying to bring it back to life. The wash has knocked the colour back, and we just want to bring it back in with the base tone, which is effectively forming a mid-tone now. Just don't want to cover what we've already done. If you end up covering what we've done, then it is almost completely pointless. Working my way around the model, being very careful not to touch that skin tone. For me on this model, the skin tone is the most important bit. You're drawing attention to the ref rather than anything he's carrying or wearing, so I don't want that skin tone damaged. Now on the other hand, when it comes to the end of this, I have actually gone back in and redone part of his face, not from scratch. I wanted to add in some red tones. He's blowing pretty hard on that whistle, his cheeks are puffed out, and I didn't really capture that. So when you see the photos at the end, what I've actually done is I've gone back in and I've applied some slight red tones over his cheeks and to his forehead, and hopefully that is portrayed good enough in the photos, but it does look pretty good. Going back over his shoes with some of the base colour, wasn't particularly happy with the way it turned out. Also the blue of his trousers had gone over the top of his front right foot, at that point. So just touching up a few areas here and there. I'm not going to make too much of a fuss over his shoes. Ultimately he's going to be stood in grass and some of it's going to be covered up anyway. I don't cover the basing in this particular video. I will cover basing in another video at a later date, but this one was quite simple. PVA glue on the base, static grass chucked on, let it dry. Oh yeah, and I've painted a base colour of green, which actually when I finished and I've looked back at it, really bright. I should have put a much darker colour in there that suited the grass. It was a bit of an amateur mistake there, but ultimately, like I said, this is a ref. He's not even going to be on the pitch, he's going to be stood to the side, and it is just there to represent a referee that, you know, is not going to be part of the game. I may even end up taking him off the base because I'm building Blood Bowl stadiums, and you know, you may well be sat on the side, which will form another part of the video. So that's him pretty much done, and here are a few photos of him. Thanks very much for watching, guys, really appreciate it. Any constructive criticism, or any negative criticism if you've got it, you know, just put it in the comments below. If you do like what you see, please press like and press subscribe, and I'll catch all you guys in the next video. See ya.